Coming up, inside Reservation Dogs, a Sámi screen dance festival, and decolonizing wealth. Plus, we'll meet a med student making a difference in Indigenous communities. Are you ready for some football? I'm Mark Trahant. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from Indian Country today.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is Indian Country Today.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahant. The National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition says it will share its own research with the Department of Interior. This will help Interior with its investigation into federal Indian boarding schools. The announcement was made this week. The executive director, Christine McCleave, says her organization has done extensive research that includes how many schools existed, how many children went to those schools, their tribal affiliations, and how many died or went missing. The initiative is a first step for the United States government to begin acknowledging the traumatic history of the Indian boarding school era. McCleave says it agreed to share decades of independent research because of the federal investigation. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland announced the investigation in June, and the report is due next spring. And Native American students at a university in Minnesota are asking for an investigation into the boarding school once housed on the campus. Members of the Indigenous student group launched a petition requesting the University of Minnesota-Morris hire a specialist in ground-penetrating radar. They want to search for any lost burial sites on campus. Archival research suggests as many as 7 students from the Morris Industrial School for Indians could be buried on campus. The boarding school was open from 1887 to 1909, and in 1960 it became a public university. Student body president Dylan Young believes the university, which offers free tuition to Native students, has a moral obligation to search for the children.
I think the one thing that everyone needs to know about this push is precisely what we stated back in July. The University of Minnesota-Morris has a moral obligation to search the school for unmarked grave sites of Native American children who were murdered at the Morris Industrial School. It's as simple as that.
Young says meetings with school administrators about the petition are ongoing. For 3 years, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have raided Wet'suwet'en's camp over the pipeline conflict in British Columbia. As APTN reports, more than 30 people were arrested in the conflict last month, and 2 of them are journalists.
A Gdempton Checkpoint spokesperson, a documentary filmmaker, and a photojournalist were among more than 30 people arrested by militarized police recently on Wet'suwet'en territory.
With guns, they cut off the internet.
Last week, a dramatic video was released to the media showing RCMP officers pointing high-caliber rifles at several people inside a small house on the territory. People inside stood back while police used a chainsaw to cut through the door. All of the arrested individuals have since been released with various conditions attached by the courts. RCMP were enforcing a court injunction prohibiting people from interfering with the construction of the Coastal GasLink natural gas pipeline. The dispute over the 670-kilometer pipeline goes back a decade and flared in 2019 and 2020. Opposition to the pipeline sparked solidarity rallies and rail blockades across Canada. In late September 2021, tensions flared once again as Coastal GasLink prepared to drill under the Wedson Kwa, also known as the Maurice River. According to Coastal GasLink, half the pipeline, which runs from Dawson Creek in northeast BC to a terminal in Kitimat on the coast, is already built. The company also says 20 elected First Nation band councils have agreed to allow the pipeline to pass through, but not Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs.
Since the start of the project, and I'm referring to this pipeline, CGL. They never proceeded to contact the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. They started instead to divide the Wet'suwet'en people through the benefit agreements and excluded the hereditary chiefs.
Pushing back is the Gdempton Checkpoint. Gdempton is one of the 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. The Gdempton Checkpoint is a group that has been controlling access to the territory. The British Columbia Civil Liberties Association says it's appalled by the increasing militarization of RCMP forces on the ground in Wet'suwet'en territory, and is demanding the police stand down and vacate the area.
You know, yes, the RCMP are on sovereign Wet'suwet'en territory, but the RCMP still have to follow the law. And freedom of the press is enshrined in the Canadian Constitution, which is the supreme law that RCMP are charged to abide by.
The Alaska Federation of Natives Convention kicks off on Monday. The theme is ANCSA at 50, Empowering Our Future. It will be held virtually for a second year due to the pandemic. Topics being covered include issues affecting Alaska Natives, tribal governance, health, and military strategy in the Arctic. Alaska's congressional delegation will make presentations, as will Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, as well as the chair of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. It will be a live televised event, and you can watch on local channels in Alaska or check out the website or its Facebook page. And those are the headlines for Indian Country today. I'm Mark Trahant. Coming up, we catch up with young Indigenous people doing extraordinary things, from television, dance, medicine, and football. Stay with us.
This is Indian Country Today.
The co-creator of Reservation Dogs takes us behind the scenes. Sterling Harjo is Seminole and Muskogee Creek citizen who grew up in rural Oklahoma. The Hula FX series features stories close to Harjo's home.
If you know me and you hear me telling stories, each episode has stories from my life or stories that I've heard or stories that I experienced. But from names to situations. There's a moment where Laura Dannon tells the coach, who's played by Bill Burr, Laura Dannon, played by Deborah Jacobs, that his nickname that her mom used to call him, which is Chogaji, does not mean Great White Warrior. It actually means toilet. And that was something that I used to call my biology teacher / coach as a joke. And I told him that it meant Great White Warrior. And then he found out what it really meant because my dad told him. So all of these little anecdotes and jokes, there's a lot of stuff that come from real life.
Reservation Dogs features young actors.
They're blown away. Some of their lives have changed, crazy. And I think one of the coolest things is seeing Native kids throughout the country dressing up as their favorite characters. Halloween's such a crazy time for Native people because we get to see people dressed up as like Pocahontas or generic sort of war chiefs or whatever. And to be able to have kids be able to dress up as their favorite characters on the show, that's pretty great and mind-blowing, and I don't know, it's just, there's a lot of the little things like that happen that I didn't expect that I'm really grateful for. One of my favorite things was there was a young Native girl who dressed up as the actress Paulina, who plays Willie Jack, dressed up as her at the Emmys in her dress, in the yellow dress. And the fact that she dressed up as her favorite actor instead of just her favorite character, I don't know, that was really beautiful to see. Willie Jack, people really identify with that character because we all know a Willie Jack. In all of our communities, there is a Willie Jack who I think, because a lot of us come from these matriarchal societies, and it's a young matriarch who's not afraid to say what she feels and not afraid to bend the rules and cross boundaries. Not afraid to be a leader, but also not afraid to step back and let other people lead. I don't know, there's something, and there's just a tough exterior, but also this really warm and sensitive interior as well. And I think, I don't know, she just kind of encapsulates, I think, a lot of the people in our communities that we know, and especially with the humor, Paulina nails that sort of Native humor that's universal in Indian country.
So, back to you leaving. You know, if you go, you're not gonna be able to do weird stuff with your friends anymore.
Well, they're going to. It's mostly their idea. And Daniel's. We're thinking California.
California?
Way better there.
How is California better than here?
'Cause Snoop Dogg's from there, Dr. Dre, Diddy, and Dr. Phil.
But it's fun here. There's things to do here. You know, eat catfish and walk around, and you can ride your bike and, you know, just walk around and look at things.
You know, the stuff I want to do, you can't do here.
That was filmmaker Sterling Harjo. This weekend, Sámi dancers take to the screen for a virtual festival. The goal of the festival is to gather screen dance makers from around all over Sápmi and show the diversity in Sámi culture and dance. Dancer and festival coordinator Liv Adia tells us about the dance in Sámi culture.
We are Indigenous people that traditionally is a traveling people. We have for many years worked with reindeers, reindeer herding, but also with fishing and other things close to the nature. But today, as any other people, we live as normal people in the society, but we have a long and big history that obviously affect us today, and something that we want to remain and keep alive.
The Screen Dance Festival encourages youth participation.
Like here in Sweden, I try to give a lot of different kind of workshops, and we're doing also children productions which are made to tell about the history of Sápmi and different fairy tales from there, to inspire them to keep on telling the stories, making games out of these stories. But by making, for example, a screen dance festival like this, we hope to encourage that the different types of expressions will come up from the young people as well, and feel like they're welcome to express their culture in whatever way they want to do it. It's okay to keep on developing and keep on making new things, like a screen dance festival that we never had before in Sápmi.
Audiences worldwide can take part in the online festival at www.invisiblepeople.se.
We are keeping the festival in English, so we are hoping people from all over the world will take part of this, and hoping that the festival will grow and maybe come back another year. So we're hoping that as many as possible will be able to take part, to see it, take dance classes, and get to know a little bit about the Sámi culture.
Thank you, Liv Adia, joining us from Sámi territory in Sweden. Let's take a look at the festival trailer.
Lofta, Sápmi Screen Dance Festival. Screened online and coming to Jokkmokk live 11th to 12th of December. Screen the festival through invisiblepeople.se/LAVDA by Sámi dancers from all over Sápmi.
That was Liv Adia, coordinator of the Sámi Screen Dance Festival. Funding for Indigenous projects isn't easy, but a Lumbee author is changing that. Edgar Villanueva's best-selling book, Decolonizing Wealth, has created a movement.
Ultimately, what I'm working to do through my book and through our work is to redistribute resources and capital back to our communities. I help folks understand the history of colonization in the US for 500 years, what has happened on this land that has been really focused on extracting resources, money, building wealth on stolen land, and to understand the imperative of returning that wealth back to our communities.
Changes are happening in philanthropy.
I think that we are seeing the field of philanthropy becoming a little bit more community-centric and sort of democratizing how decisions are made. Historically, in this industry, there have, the power and the decision-making has been held by just a few folks. We're seeing more and more foundations turn to participatory methods of making decisions about resources. So bringing in folks from communities to advise and support the creation of strategies in terms of what gets funded and to actually make decisions around where resources go. We also have in this sector now many Native-led philanthropic organizations, from groups like First Nations Development Institute that's been around forever to newer funds like mine, Liberated Capital, who are led by people from our communities who are acting as sort of supportive bridge organizations between these donors and institutions and our communities. And by having Native people leading these intermediaries, we're seeing, a more groundswell support and knowledge and understanding of our communities and more trust to get resources through our institutions in a way that is less harmful, I would say, to our communities. During COVID, we at my fund moved a couple $1 million to Native-led organizations. We even had a direct cash payments program. And one of our partners in New Mexico said, "Oh my God, it made such a difference to receive resources from another Native, a Native-led fund, because they didn't have to, prove that they were worthy or jump through all of the hoops, because we move money in a very different way that centers relationship and trust."
That was author Edgar Villanueva. When we come back, an extraordinary medical student.
This is Indian Country Today.
Victor Lopez Carmen is a third-year medical student at Harvard University, wishing to bring health equity to Native communities. Major media company Forbes recognized his work earlier this week by selecting him as a recipient of its 30 Under 30 award under its healthcare category. I sat down with Victor to learn more about the work that brought his recognition. Victor, welcome to Phoenix and congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be with Indian Country today. I grew up reading it and really proud of everything Indian Country Today is doing, and just really ecstatic to be here today with you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, tell me about your work as co-chair of the UN Global Indigenous Youth Caucus.
Yeah, so when I was in my first year of undergrad, I was in Ithaca College, and it was away from my community. So I was trying to find a way to connect back with Indigenous peoples, with Indigenous rights, and I was about 3 hours away from New York City. So I started going to New York City and getting involved in the Indigenous rights movement within the UN system. And then when I went to the UN for the first time, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, I met the Youth Caucus there, and I just started getting more and more involved, and eventually was elected co-chair.
What's so extraordinary about your generation is that because of social media, you can be connected to people all over the world all the time. Mm-hmm. How does that inform your work with the UN?
It's amazing because before the UN, I was aware, of my tribes, of Indigenous peoples here in the US, but I didn't understand the magnitude of, the global magnitude of Indigenous rights and the Indigenous rights movement in, all these different countries, over 90 countries that Indigenous peoples live in. And I think having social media, being able to connect and stay connected with other Indigenous youth around the world I think really helped us to be cohesive throughout the year.
Did you find issues that are in common?
Yeah, I think we have more in common than we do not in common. Obviously with colonization all around the world, but I think particularly with Indigenous youth, one thing that I've heard very strongly over the years is that how important our languages are and passing those languages on. And I think it's been a struggle in many different Indigenous communities all across the world.
Both in your studies and as you practice, do you see parallels between traditional healing and Western medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people, and I've read articles, I think in Indian Country Today as well, that so many what people think as modern day treatments for sicknesses were actually invented by Indigenous peoples. Like there's so many, including the syringe, I think I read, and different plants and herbs that we've been using that have now been, commodified and made into very marketable drugs that, rack in millions and millions of dollars. I know that a significant amount of cancer treatments come from traditional plants and traditional medicines used in the Amazon rainforest by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. So I think, when people think of medicine, oftentimes they split traditional and modern, but I think many times, our medicine is true science, it's medicine. And we've contributed to the field of medicine in really tremendous ways. But at the same time, we do have our traditional medicine as well that, is sometimes different, but I think it's equally valid. And we need to start emphasizing in the medical field, particularly, that traditional medicines are very important and a very important aspect of health in Indigenous communities.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Victor.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And best wishes on the challenges ahead.
Thank you.
54 high school student athletes gathered in Minneapolis for the 4th Indigenous Bowl. Sponsored by 7G, the game was last Sunday at US Bank Stadium, the home of the Minnesota Vikings. The players on the purple and gold teams were from 16 states and represented 37 tribes. ICT's Shirley Snavy and Colby Kicking Woman have this report.
This is one of the coolest events because it's so diverse, because these kids come from so many different backgrounds that they carry with them. They carry their culture with them. They carry their tribe, their clan.
Arriving Wednesday, the athletes practiced together and gathered at the Minneapolis Indian Center for some leadership training.
It is eye-opening. I didn't even know California had almost 100 tribes. I did not know that. When I think of tribes from the Midwest, from Wisconsin, I just think of the big five that we're a part of, the Onondaga, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. And then there's the Mystery Six, which is Tuscarora. But that's all I thought was out there. And seeing all, Catch His Enemy, I've such unique names, and it's nice.
Bené Kalik is 7G's executive director and the mother of one of the 7 student athletes that started the organization.
And so what happened at the Pro Bowl is we sat down with the boys, and I said, what do you guys want to do? Reno Franklin, Chairman Emeritus from the Kashaya Band of Pomos, his son was one of them, and he asked the boys, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue this? And they all said yes. And so I said, okay, well, let's make it happen. Let's do something that will help guide your peers, your brothers, your cousins to the next level, like what you're doing here. You guys are the leadership.
Jerry Racine is one of the coaches.
We do have athletes out there. And for us to be able to help all these kids, and help fulfill their dreams and their goals and help give them the answers and the tools and the resources so they too can go off and play college football or basketball or baseball or whatever it may be. And that's a huge part of it, is just creating a resource for them so they can be successful.
350 high school athletes applied this year, and 7G Ambassador Dominic Tiger Cortez says it's just the beginning of programs for youth.
You know, we're going to be progressing into a lot of different sports, both boys and girls in Indian country, because that's what we need in our communities. You know, not just a program that just serves one thing. You know, we have to be multi-dimensional, and we have to be able to really create programming that can affect and connect with a lot of these kids. Sports and non-sports programs, educational, wellness, cultural. You know, there's so many aspects that we have to tap into, and 7G is going to do it.
This was a dream come true for these young men. Many have never been in a pro stadium, let alone get to play in one. The Minnesota Vikings and the NFL made this happen. The crowds, the Jumbotron, the well wishes from politicians, and the TV crews. MVP player Deshaun Allen summed it up.
I was smiling ear to ear. It was awesome to be able to get MVP and notice for my talents for this game. Oh, it was pretty surreal. You know, like every time I wasn't running or blocking or catching, I just look up and I just soak in the moment, because it was pretty surreal. No one else really does it.
In Minneapolis, Minnesota, Shirley Snavy, Indian Country Today.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news and updates, visit IndianCountryToday.com. Stay safe, my relatives, and have a great weekend. I'm Mark Trahan.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing
This is Indian Country Today.